Good evening, I'm Joe Fryer coming to you from the NBC News Bureau in Washington, D.C. Here are some of the stories we're following now tonight.
I have no regrets. I'm following what the lawyers have told me they want me to do. It's exactly what we're doing. There's no there. Thank you.
The president says he has no regrets when it comes to keeping those classified documents secret from the public for so long. The saga continues. On top of the serious allegations that he lied about his background, the latest subplot in the George Santos story is whether he once performed as a drag queen in Brazil. A winter storm, freezing rain and heavy snow are forecast to slam the Northeast this weekend, with Mother Nature's fury still being felt by folks in the Midwest. March for Life, the annual anti-abortion rights rally, returns to Washington. But with Roe overturned, where does the movement go from here? This weekend also marks the 50th anniversary of the Roe versus Wade decision. We'll look back on this pivotal moment in the fight for reproductive rights.
Well, it means that January 22nd, 1973 will stand out as one of the great days for freedom and free choice.
We begin tonight with President Biden, who is marking exactly 2 years in office today, the halfway point of this term. He spent the day touting his accomplishments, like the nation's historically low unemployment, but the president still finds himself under a cloud of controversy. Now, when he put his hand on that Bible and took the oath of office exactly 2 years ago, he probably never imagined that both he and his predecessor would be under investigation for their handling of classified documents. Yesterday, while touring storm damage in California, the president finally broke his days-long silence over the growing controversy.
We're fully cooperating, looking forward to getting this resolved quickly. I think you're going to find there's nothing there. I have no regrets. I'm following what the lawyers have told me they want me to do. It's exactly what we're doing. There's no there. Thank you.
Those comments come as Republicans in the House continue to push forward with their investigations into the Department of Justice, asking the agency for information on a number of topics. Today, the DOJ told House Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan that the agency stands ready to work with congressional investigators, but warned it won't share information about ongoing cases. According to a letter obtained by NBC News, the Assistant Attorney General for Legislative Affairs wrote, "Consistent with long-standing policy and practice, any oversight requests must be weighed against the department's interests in protecting the integrity of its work. Long-standing department policy prevents us from confirming or denying the existence of pending investigations in response to congressional requests." Joining us now is senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. Kelly, good to have you with us. So does this letter from the DOJ to Jordan, does it set up a showdown of sorts between the DOJ and House Republicans? I mean, is this a sign of what's to come over the next 2 years?
Well, it certainly puts some of the tension right there out in public, and it sort of sets the table for what is to come. And what we really can expect is there will be aggressive attempts at oversight from House Republicans. They've been very clear that that was their intention. If they won the majority, no matter how slim it is, in the House, and they would have the power of the gavel, power of subpoena, power of oversight. That is a congressional function, and they want to use that to assert that authority to investigate a number of issues. And at the same time, the Department of Justice wants to make clear the lines they see. If there are ongoing investigations, if there are issues relating to access to personnel at the Department of Justice, they will follow their own protocols. So there will be some butting of heads on these issues going forward. There may be times and places where the Department of Justice will provide personnel to testify. They gave some guidelines on how to do that and provide information, but following some guidelines. And that'll be something that'll be a point of tension going forward. Joe?
Kelly, let's talk specifically about the investigation into the current president's handling of classified documents. The New York Times is out with a piece that says the White House gambled that without going public, they would convince the Justice Department that the matter was little more than a minor good faith mistake, different from the case against former President Trump. What's the feeling now at the White House as this continues to unfold? How worried is the White House about how this could impact the president's 2024 plans, which, of course, haven't even been announced yet?
Well, certainly a lot of frustration about the fact a story like this is persistent, and there are questions, and they are fueled by the absence of new information and fueled by the intentions of House Republicans who will want to examine this further. And because the White House has taken a strategic position of saying very little, the president did add his own voice when he was out in California surveying storm damage. He did respond to a question about it, and he added more than what we had heard in the past, where he said he doesn't think there's any there, and he doesn't have any regrets. Well, that opened up some questions. I asked the press secretary, well, what specifically doesn't he have regrets about? What at the same time he talks about taking very seriously the matter of how classified documents should be handled. Was that simply about how this has unfolded, or was it about the overall facts in this? We don't really have an answer to that. The question he was posed included the notion of regrets about how this is all played out. But the president didn't go into the specifics there. So the fact that they have to deal with this collides with what they wanted to be a very happy point from their perspective. 2 years into their administration, they wanted to tout all their achievements as they see them from a legislative perspective on the international stage and so forth. And they have done that. But at the same time, it does raise questions and puts the administration and the president in sort of an unknown zone about what comes next. And on 2024, the plan is, as we understand it, the president intends to run again. The timing of an announcement, according to NBC News reporting, is that it would come after the State of the Union address, which is in early February. And is this casting a shadow? That's for people to decide. Is it frustrating the president? I think there's clear evidence of that. Joe?
All right. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell at the White House. Kelly, thank you. While the documents investigation has put the president on defense, as Kelly just noted today, he tried to shift the narrative, focusing on his accomplishments. Speaking to mayors from across the country, he marked 2 years since his inauguration by highlighting what he feels has changed since January 2021.
The pandemic was raging, our economy was reeling, but we acted together. Now, 2 years in, it's clearer than ever that our plans work, and we're building the economy from the bottom up and the middle out, not just the top down. 2 years ago this week, 18 million people were out of work. 2 years ago this week. Now the number is under 1.6 million. We've created 11 million jobs, 750,000 manufacturing jobs.
Joining us now is former Republican Congressman from Florida, Carlos Curbelo. He's also an NBC News political analyst. Carlos, good to have you with us. So as he heads into the State of the Union in 2.5 weeks and a possible re-election announcement after that, his approval rating down 4 points since December, according to one poll, and 60% of Americans think he handled the classified documents inappropriately. So in your mind right now, where do things stand for the president, and how much is this documents controversy impacting him?
Joe, good evening. We don't know yet what the legal ramifications of this whole investigation are going to be. However, we do know that this has become a major political scandal for the Biden administration. I mean, think about it. The Biden administration had put together quite a winning streak. They had gotten some bills through Congress in a bipartisan basis, gun control, chips. Then they passed a major Democratic priority, what they called the Inflation Reduction Act, which was largely a climate bill. Then Democrats overperformed in the midterm election. So Joe Biden was riding very high. And then just a week ago or so, we get this bombshell about Joe Biden being under investigation, apparently, for something similar to what Donald Trump is under investigation. So this breaks the Democratic winning streak. It puts the Biden administration on defense, and it really also does reduce the president's moral authority, because he had cast himself as someone who was different than Donald Trump. And without question, the cases are different. But for that, you have to get into the details, and you have to start explaining on the surface. Both current President Biden, former President Trump are under investigation, or authorities are at the very least looking into the mishandling of classified documents. So this is very unfortunate for the Biden administration.
Let's put the documents aside for a moment. You mentioned the accomplishments in his first 2 years. I mean, Democrats had control of the House and Senate, so the president was able to accomplish perhaps a surprising amount of his agenda. Now Republicans control the House. So is there anything at all he can accomplish? What do you think he needs to focus on in these next 2 years facing that reality?
Well, he has to try to put this controversy behind him, and then he has to be the old Joe Biden. Joe Biden ran in 2020 as a deal maker, as someone who was an institutionalist, someone who had worked in the Senate with Republicans and Democrats, someone who has cut deals and recently appeared with Republican Senate leader Mitch McConnell. That's when Joe Biden's at his best. This previous Congress was actually a bit difficult for him because liberals in Congress had these major ambitions, and that really isn't Biden's history. Biden's history is one of being a deal maker, one of being one of those members in the middle, trying to get deals done between the two parties. So he really has to reach out and make an effort to reach out to House Republicans and see if they can get victories on issues such as permitting reform, maybe criminal justice reform, maybe even immigration reform, although that would be difficult. But Joe Biden should be in his element in divided government. That's when he has typically been a protagonist during his years in public office.
If we look at this newest Quinnipiac poll, the president earned the highest marks for how he's handled the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But if he were running for office right now, I mean, what else do you think he has to run on? Which accomplishment from the past 2 years could earn him the most independent votes, which is going to be key to winning in 2024 if he chooses to run?
Joe, for independent voters, economic issues tend to be number one. So the president, number one, has to keep hoping that inflation keeps easing. There's some things that he could do, but by and large, the Fed is in control of that whole situation, and they're trying to manage it as best they can. If that goes well, if a year from now, a year and a half from now, the inflation situation in the country's under control, that was the biggest threat to Democrats in these past midterm elections. They got lucky that Donald Trump became such a big distraction and didn't allow Republicans to focus on that inflation issue. But if, in addition to some of these bipartisan victories, Joe Biden can get in front of the American people in a year and a half and say, we have got inflation under control and the economic situation is at least stable in our country, that would really impress independent voters.
All right, Carlos Curbelo, thanks so much for joining us on a Friday night. We appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Good night.
Republican Congressman George Santos is denying additional claims about his past, and this time it's not about his campaign or really his resume. Video appears to show Santos in drag in Brazil. A Brazilian journalist tells NBC News he's very confident the person he interviewed in that clip from around 2007 is Santos. Now, Santos denies these claims on Twitter, saying that the story about him performing as a drag queen is categorically false. Let's be clear here. This is not illegal. There is nothing wrong with performing in drag. If Santos wants to lip sync for his life, good for him. But this is newsworthy because Santos is separately facing serious allegations that he has lied and has misrepresented his background. Now, he has apologized for some of those embellishments, but is facing multiple investigations, including by the Justice Department. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale has the latest on the controversies swirling around the congressman.
Joe, another day, another story about Congressman George Santos, this one regarding pictures and video that NBC News was able to confirm of Santos appearing dressed in drag. Santos says that he's never performed in drag. Nevertheless, these pictures obviously tell a different story, as do NBC's conversations on the ground with both a video journalist who interviewed Santos at a pride parade, as well as a woman who describes herself as the RuPaul of drag in Brazil, who says that she was a mentor to Santos during the time that he was a teenager there coming up in the drag world. It's another moment, though, of an inconsistency within the Santos story, not just in terms of what he's saying, which is that he never dressed in drag despite the fact that there are pictures of him in it, but it's also a moment where it's an incongruity in terms of the policy. Santos is someone who has supported anti-LGBTQ+ legislation in states like Florida, despite the fact that he himself ran as openly gay in 2022 and has a partner and has a husband currently. But it's it's also a moment where drag queens broadly are being demonized within the conservative movement right now. Yet another moment where Santos, though, is in the spotlight. And I think the question here in Congress is lawmakers are out of session right now, but when they come back next week, the goal for them is going to be to push ahead on a whole list of priorities on investigations, on trying to show Americans what their majority is going to be based on. They're not going to want to be talking about George Santos, but they probably will have to be, especially as it seems like we continue to get a new piece of information about this person every single day. You sort of have to wonder, and frankly, what my sources have asked me is, when does this become untenable? At this point, he's holding firm, but the question is how much longer that will last and if there's a tipping point here. Joe?
It could have been worse. That's what we're hearing from investigators in Indiana, where a gunman opened fire inside a Walmart last night. Police in Evansville say the heroic actions of an employee likely saved the life of a coworker who was being targeted by the gunman. Now, that woman was the only person injured when police say 25-year-old Ronald Ray Mosley walked into a store break room and shot her in the face. Mosley was eventually shot and killed by officers. Tonight, we're learning he used to work at this Walmart, and authorities believe he was specifically targeting current employees. NBC's Jesse Kirsch is in Cleveland. Jesse, tell us more about this employee's heroic actions. How was the victim in this case able to survive?
Yeah, so Joe, really remarkable story. And again, as you mentioned there, we just have one victim who was shot and is surviving, according to police. And it just gives you an idea of obviously how much worse this could have been, because authorities say they don't know exactly how many shots were fired, but several shots were fired both at that employee as well as at officers, according to authorities. And they're still piecing together exactly how many bullets were fired. But again, we're talking about a situation where you had about a dozen employees in this one area of the store, according to authorities, and also about 40 people shopping in the store around 10 p.m. last night. And that's when police say that the suspect showed up at the employee break room as employees were getting ready for a meeting around 10 p.m. And they say that's when the suspect walked into this space with a 9mm handgun. And one of the employees, a team lead, was able to escape from that area undetected, quickly called 911. Then, according to authorities, the gunshot goes off. This suspect shoots a victim in the face, and then this other victim, or excuse me, this other person, this other employee who the suspect had apparently singled out and asked to stay in the middle of the room with the woman who was shot, the suspect says, or the police say at that point, that male victim, would-be victim, fled that area. The suspect gave chase, and so this hero employee apparently goes into that room again, gets this victim who has just been shot in the face to another space, shuts the door, locks the door, turns the light off, and police are convinced that that suspect would have come back and was looking for that woman again and would have tried to kill her, if not actually killed her, had this hero, as she is being described, not stepped up in that very scary situation, Joe.
And incredible, with all the employees who were there and all the customers as well, that more people weren't hurt in this. Now, authorities say the gunman does have a history at this Walmart location. What can you tell us about his previous employment there?
That's right. So according to authorities, the suspect was an employee at this store in May of 2022, and that's when authorities say that he assaulted 4 of his coworkers, at which point he was then fired by the company. Walmart has told NBC News tonight that the suspect was not an employee after May of 2022, and he had been in court, in mental health court specifically, just hours before this shooting, according to prosecutors, in regards to that prior case, Joe. And of course, unfortunately, that then led to this horrible situation hours later. We don't know yet if they are exactly tied together, but authorities do believe this was a targeted attack, Joe.
All right, NBC's Jesse Kirsch. Jesse, thank you. After the break, Elon Musk testifies in a courtroom today. The case stems back to something he tweeted back in 2018, before he owned Twitter. Plus, layoff after layoff. Google now the latest company to announce cuts. So what's really behind tech companies making these big changes? Now Tonight is just getting started. The latest in the Sam Bankman-Fried criminal trial tops our roundup of what's happening in the world of business. Federal prosecutors seized nearly $700 million in cash and assets from Bankman-Fried, which was linked to the cryptocurrency exchange FTX. This comes from a new court filing today. Most of that money comes from Robinhood stock. Prosecutors say Bankman-Fried bought the shares using allegedly stolen customer funds, which the former CEO denies. Meanwhile, the crypto lender Genesis Trading filed for bankruptcy late last night. Genesis made noise last year when it promised incredibly high returns on its customers' crypto holdings. But following the collapse of FTX, the company was forced to freeze customer withdrawals. The Wall Street Journal reports that Genesis sought an emergency billion-dollar bailout from investors, but no one came calling. And Elon Musk took the stand today in a trial over, well, tweets. In 2018, Musk tweeted he had, quote, funding secured to take Tesla private. Tesla shareholders are trying to convince jurors that tweet and others were not true, therefore violating securities laws. Today, Musk told the jury, quote, just because I tweet something does not mean people believe it or will act accordingly. The trial is scheduled to resume on Monday. Google's parent company Alphabet says it will cut 12,000 jobs, which is around 6% of the company's total workforce. The CEO of Alphabet and Google sent an open letter to employees today outlining what he calls a difficult decision, adding that he takes full responsibility for the decisions that led to these layoffs. A number of big tech companies have recently announced layoffs. In fact, earlier this week, Microsoft said it was cutting 10,000 jobs, affecting nearly 5% of its total workforce. NBC business and technology correspondent JJ McCorvey joins us now with more on this. So JJ, walk us through this latest round of layoffs. Why are they happening, and do you expect we're going to see more as the year progresses?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, just this morning, Alphabet, Google's parent company, announced that it was going to lay off 12,000 employees, which is about 6% of its workforce, which for Google is a pretty substantial number. Then there's Amazon, there's Microsoft, there's Twitter over the past few months. And the way economists and other experts have described it to me is that the tech industry is facing a bit of a course correction. During the pandemic, there's been a lot of different changes in the way we live and work and shop. And so you saw companies like Amazon beef up its capabilities to deliver more products to people who were under lockdown, for example. You saw a lot of companies taking on more debt, recruiting more, ramping up wages to be competitive, among the quote unquote great resignation. And so I think as far as what we can expect going forward, if this week is any indication, it seems like a good chance that we'll see more of these layoffs.
And because of that, I mean, I've got to imagine it is a stressful time to even enter the industry. What are you hearing from new hires in the tech world? I mean, are they afraid about what's happening?
Yeah, so shockingly, a lot of the tech workers I talked to who just pivoted into the industry from other jobs, perhaps they were a nurse or a teacher, and we know those industries were heavily battered by the pandemic. A lot of them who transitioned into tech are actually feeling really good. And, admittedly, it took me by surprise. So you just interview after interview, it was, I feel confident. I feel like I have more control over my career because of the decisions I made earlier in the pandemic. And so, when you think about the economic mobility that a lot of these new tech workers experience, you can kind of understand where they're coming from as we head into a potential recession.
Yeah, I mean, they're probably feeling pretty good because despite all the layoffs, we know there is still a huge demand for tech skills right now. What kind of incentives are we seeing for people to switch into the industry?
Yeah, so actually, I spoke to the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, and they gave us some new data that showed that moving from a job requiring no digital skills to one requiring at least 3 digital skills can bump your pay to about 45% more than what you're making before in your previous position. I mean, that's a really big deal. So you can understand why people are kind of rushing to upskill, so as the term is called, during this time. And a lot of the people I talked to, were indicative of that. I spoke to one young woman who she was making around $35,000 in her previous job, and then almost doubled that, or more than doubled that, to $76,000 in her new coding job. And so you can see like how adding digital skills can really affect your economic stability.
JJ McCorvey giving us a little reason for optimism today. JJ, we appreciate your reporting. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
How much can you trust the organic label on your food? Turns out not a whole lot. For the first time in 30 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is hoping to change that. NBC's Gotti Schwartz has the story.
For those that peruse the organic aisles, this is what often comes to mind. Lush pastures of regenerative soil and happy cows like those at the Alexander family farms in California.
How important is it to make sure that the label organic means organic?
It's everything. It's consumer trust. It means purity. It means food in its very natural form.
Now, quick refresher on what actually gets the so-called organic stamp of approval. It's produce that's grown without any synthetic fertilizer, pesticides, or genetic modification, and meat and chicken raised in living conditions that allow for open grazing, no antibiotics or hormones, and are fed 100% organic feed.
But usually all that is promised by a label that some dishonest companies have used for fraud. Over the last several years, organic fraud rings have been busted importing non-organic products in from Eastern Europe and selling them at organic premiums, while prosecutors in states like Iowa, South Dakota, and Minnesota have charged some farmers for selling organic fraud as well. And now the government is beefing up its oversight in the $63 billion industry for the first time in decades, requiring organic import certificates for goods from overseas, more unannounced inspections, and an increase in the number of trained organic certifiers.
If you cheat in organic, you'll get caught, you'll go to jail, or you'll be fined. But what this does, it really makes that easier to catch the bad guys and harder to be a bad guy in the first place.
While organic farmers like the Alexanders say it's always good to look beyond the label and do your own research into exactly how your food is grown.
People used to know their farmers. Do you think that it's time to get to know their farmers again?
Absolutely.
Of course. Yeah. And, we always invite all of our consumers and anybody we talk to come see our ranch and our farm anytime.
Gotti Schwartz, NBC News.
Our thanks to Gotti for that report. After the break, more of the top stories we're following this hour, including protests in France that grew so large the Eiffel Tower was closed to visitors. Plus, Florida's governor is blocking a new AP course from being taught in high schools. And the disturbing new details about two paramedics charged with murdering a man they placed face down on a stretcher. It's all just ahead. Stay close. Time now for some of the big headlines we're watching tonight. In Florida, Tampa officers received an award for saving an overheated baby in an abandoned stolen car. The officers were nearby when they heard an 11-month-old was inside the hot vehicle. They drove to an apartment parking lot and scaled a fence to rescue the baby inside. The child made a full recovery and was reunited with her mom. Thousands of protesters are marching into Peru's capital, demanding the ouster of the current president. Dozens have died in the unrest since the former president was removed last month after a failed attempt to dissolve Congress. This is the worst political violence the country has seen in decades. The state of Florida is blocking an advanced placement course on African-American studies from being taught in high schools. Governor Ron DeSantis' administration says it violates state law and is historically inaccurate. It's not exactly clear which content the governor's office is referring to. College Board, the company behind AP classes, says the new course is, quote, undergoing a rigorous multi-year pilot phase. In France, more than 1 million demonstrators took to the streets. They're protesting the president's plan to raise the retirement age. The strikes disrupted schools, train services, and businesses yesterday. The Eiffel Tower was even closed to visitors. President Macron wants to raise the legal age from 62 to 64. And this year, women in Congress will lead powerful spending committees for the first time in history. They will hold all 4 top positions on the House and Senate Appropriations Committees, which are responsible for federal spending. On the Senate side, it's Senators Patty Murray and Susan Collins. And on the House side, Congresswomen Kay Granger and Rosa DeLauro. 2 Illinois paramedics charged with murdering a man in their care pleaded not guilty today. Peter Cadigan and Peggy Fenley appeared in court today. They are accused of strapping Earl Moore Jr. to a stretcher tightly and face down. Prosecutors say that led to his death. The Sangamon County State's Attorney released the body camera footage of this incident last week. And a warning, you may find this video disturbing. On December 18th, Springfield police called an ambulance to Moore's home. A person at the scene said Moore was in withdrawal from alcohol and was hallucinating. The paramedics are seen in the video strapping him down. Moore was pronounced dead after he arrived at the hospital. Now, today's court appearance comes a day after Moore's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the EMS workers and their employer. Joining us now is NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster. So, Shaq, first of all, what happened during today's court appearance?
Hi there, Joe. Well, this was a pretty extensive court hearing that we witnessed earlier today. It went on for about 3 hours long. It was a preliminary hearing, which essentially means the judge was listening to arguments from both sides, from prosecutors and the defense attorneys, to determine whether or not there was probable cause or enough evidence to go ahead and make it to trial. Defense attorneys argued that the actions that you saw in that video were not criminal. Prosecutors saying that was not the case, and that was why they were charging them with those counts of first-degree murder. Ultimately, the judge determined that yes, there was enough evidence to take this to trial, and that's when we got the pleas from the 2 defendants, the not guilty pleas for, again, those charges of first-degree murder, Joe.
Shaq, what can you tell us about this wrongful death lawsuit? We know well-known civil rights attorney Ben Crump is representing the family, right?
That's right. This was a lawsuit that was filed yesterday. There was a press conference with the family and with Ben Crump. Ben Crump called the actions of the paramedics barbaric and said it's unlike anything he has ever seen. This is a civil trial, so this will go to civil court. There will likely, if it follows what you see with most civil lawsuits, it will likely end in some sort of settlement. That amount that they're looking for was not described yesterday, but the point that you heard from both the family and the lawyers, the family attorneys yesterday, is that they want accountability, not just on the criminal side, but also in the civil side. Named in that lawsuit are not just the 2 paramedics, but also the ambulance company. They believe that training was also a part of this.
All right, Shaq, thanks so much.
You got it.
The massive winter storm slamming New England is throwing its last punches after sweeping across the country and hammering the Midwest. A winter storm warning is in effect for 3 counties in New Hampshire. Parts of the state got over a half-foot of snow. In Massachusetts, the weather threat pushed more than 70 schools to cancel or delay classes today. But the Bay State is not just dealing with snowfall. The storm is causing some minor coastal flooding around Revere, Massachusetts, and it's expected to continue well into tomorrow. Now, for a look at the weather forecast, let's bring in NBC News meteorologist Angie Lassman. So, Angie, what is in store for this weekend?
Well, there's a couple of things here, Joe. We still are dealing with the leftover kind of effects of that system that went from California to the East Coast over the past week. We're going to have these lingering snow showers for a little while longer. By tomorrow, they'll clear out. We'll have a brighter day across much of the Northeast. But then we turn our attention to this next storm system that we're going to watch. And this too will impact the East Coast here over the coming days. This is the area we're watching. Doesn't look like much, but it is a whole lot of moisture as we get down the line, as we say, head into Saturday and into Sunday. You can see how this area of low pressure develops and eventually works its way northeast. For tomorrow, it's mostly rain across the southeast. We're not looking at a great chance of any strong or even severe storms, but we'll keep a close eye on that. As far as that rain, it continues moving into parts of the East Coast here as we continue into Saturday. So if you live in the interior areas of the Northeast or along the Atlantic for places like Washington, New York, and up into Boston, it'll be rain for you, snow for the interior. Now, we're not looking at rainfall over maybe 2 or 3 inches, but it still could be impactful for any weekend plans that you have. The good news is that system moves offshore quickly as we get into the beginning part of our work week. But then we'll start to turn our attention to the next storm system, which I'll show you here in a moment. There's those rainfall totals. It looks like the highest amounts are going to be focused more towards the southeast, Georgia, into South Carolina, maybe Alabama. snowfall totals, most of us anywhere from 2 to 4 inches, maybe some higher totals in higher amounts. But how about that next storm system? Well, here's the lay of the land. We have a much quieter forecast for folks on the West Coast. There's a high pressure that's been building in. That's going to keep it dry and take any moisture to the north of California and other places on the West Coast so they can kind of dry out. But when it's quiet on the West Coast, oftentimes it's busier for the East Coast, and that's exactly what's going to happen. A dip in the jet stream brings this kind of parade of storms to the East Coast. And so as we head into Tuesday and eventually Wednesday and Thursday, the next storm system will develop close to where this first one is going to develop. It'll be into the parts of the plains, and it kind of takes that same track. So by the time we get into Wednesday or Thursday, heavy rain, maybe some strong winds, as well as some significant snow could be developing across parts of the east. So here's where it looks like most of the rain is again hugging the coast. New York City still not looking at a great chance for significant snowfall or any snowfall, really. We could take a run at beating a record of the longest we've gone since the first snowfall. So we'll watch for that. But if folks live in places like the Midwest and the interior areas of the Northeast, that's where we'll have a better chance of dealing with some of that snowfall. You can see not impressive when it comes to snow along the coast this year, Joe. New York should have about 10 inches of snow by now. We, in fact, have 0. Will we get some? Possibly. If we don't by January 29th, that beats the date of the latest time that we've seen a first snowfall. So we'll wait and see on that.
Wow, you know, this Minnesota boy who lives in New York is missing his snow, so hopefully we don't break that record. All right, fingers crossed, Angie. NBC's Angie Lastman, thank you so much. Roe versus Wade may have been overturned, but the voices on both sides of the fight are just as strong as they were in the 70s. After the break, we're reflecting on the 50-year battle over abortion rights. For decades now, anti-abortion rights activists would come to Washington with one clear objective: to overturn Roe versus Wade. Well, the Supreme Court did overturn Roe 7 months ago, making today's March for Life rally the first one without a real clear objective. Still, that didn't stop thousands of abortion opponents from gathering on the National Mall. They're setting the stage for what's next. NBC's Marissa Parra was there.
Yeah, by and large, people who are participating in March for Life can agree on one thing. They want to see an end to abortions. But in terms of what comes next and how that gets done, that's where the road starts to split. Some want to see a federal ban. Others do not. They say that should still be left up to the states. And in terms of how they're marching, why they're marching today, well, we spoke to the president for March for Life. She said what she wants to see, because she doesn't think that the country is ready for a federal ban, she wants to see a cultural shift. She wants abortion to become something that is just simply unthinkable. So we had a chance to speak to people on both sides, both supporters and critics of abortion rights, about why they showed up today.
Everything that happened before Roe, that was just the preseason. That was the end of the beginning. And right now, we are determined to protect life and law.
Multiple people walking by have said, thank you for being out here, and are smiling and giving support. And that is the point. That is why I'm here. It is to show that we will not let America be bullied out of the right to abortion.
So you heard from a counter-protester there. In terms of what comes next, well, as soon as this Sunday, we're going to see protests and marches all across the country on this 50th anniversary of Roe versus Wade. They're called Bigger Than Roe because the whole point that they're trying to make is that Roe was never meant to be the end. That was supposed to be the beginning. And they're asking for more than what Roe had in place before it was overturned. And in terms of what comes next, keep an eye also out for abortion pills. That's going to be a big part of the discussions with the FDA's change in their guidance that makes it easier for people to access those. Now pharmacies will have the ability to distribute those. Walgreens, CVS have already said that they will start to do that. Local pharmacies will have a lot of decisions to be making in terms of whether they will decide to do that or not. States will have decisions to make, so keep an eye on that as we approach Decision 2024, because again, this is a huge talking piece, and there's no shortage of people trying to drum up support, trying to get people to the ballot to vote on these exact issues, Joe.
Marissa Parra, thank you so much. And as Marissa mentioned, this Sunday does mark the 50th anniversary of Roe versus Wade. And as the country continues to grapple with what abortion access looks like now that Roe has fallen, we want to take you back to that day when the landmark Supreme Court ruling established a constitutional right to abortion. Here's NBC's Garrick Utley at the anchor desk for Nightly News 50 years ago.
The other major story today, aside from the death of Lyndon Johnson, the tragic death, and the hopes for peace in Vietnam, is the decision of the United States Supreme Court. It handed down a historic decision about abortion. The court said in a 7-2 decision that in the first 3 months of pregnancy, only the woman and her physician may decide whether she may have an abortion. In the second 3 months, all the state may do is regulate abortion procedures. And only in the final 3 months of pregnancy can the state forbid abortion.
It was 50 years ago. Supreme Court justices sided with a Texas woman who used the legal pseudonym Jane Roe against the defendant, Dallas District Attorney Henry Wade. At the time, abortions were illegal in Texas. Attorneys Linda Coffey and Sarah Weddington challenged that law, with the case eventually going to the Supreme Court. The landmark ruling legalized abortion across the country.
Today's decision came as a shock to both anti- and pro-abortionist forces.
Well, it means that January 22nd, 1973 will stand out as one of the great days for freedom and free choice. This allows a woman free choice as whether or not to remain pregnant. This is extraordinary.
How many millions of children prior to their birth will never live to see the light of day because of the shocking action of the majority of the United States Supreme Court today? Whatever their legal rationale, 7 men have made a tragic utilitarian judgment regarding who shall live and who shall die.
For some women, this law will mean the difference between having an abortion or not. For many others, the law will mean simply having the abortion in their own state instead of traveling to another state like New York.
The majority decision was written by Justice Harry Blackmun. He said that a woman's right to abortion fell within a right to privacy protected by the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause. Justice William Rehnquist wrote the dissenting opinion. He claimed the court had taken the concept of liberty too far, writing, quote, "Liberty is not guaranteed absolutely against deprivation, only against deprivation without due process of the law."
From the beginning, pro-abortionist forces have seen this issue as a question of freedom of an individual's choice. The freedom to have an abortion is now legal in every state. The basic legal fight is in effect over. But according to the Roman Catholic Church, the moral fight will never end, and the Church will continue to instruct women and institutions not to take advantage of this choice.
Now, the battle over abortion rights is entering a new phase, with Roe v. Wade overturned 50 years after that historic decision. For more, let's bring in Tony Award-winning author of The Vagina Monologues and activist V. Ensler, whose memoir, Reckoning, will be released later this month. Also, we want to bring in Dr. Jill Gibson, medical director of Planned Parenthood Arizona. Both join me now. Thank you for joining us on this Friday night. V, I want to start with you. You know the reproductive rights movement from before Roe. How do you reflect on the past 50 years, especially where we are today?
Well, I think it's really astonishing to even think that on the anniversary of what should be an incredible celebration of our abortion rights protected by Roe versus Wade, we are here in outrage and resistance. And let me begin by saying it is a sorrowful decision. It is not a decision that is supported by 85% of this country. It's a fringe decision by, in my opinion, a very illegitimate court. So I want to begin there. I have lived through a time, I was 19 50 years ago, and I lived in when I was young where there weren't abortion rights, and I know what women lived through and what it was like to feel like you had no bodily autonomy. You couldn't make decisions over your own choice, over your own body, over your own decision to have a child or not have a child. And I will say for myself, I was a person who grew up in a very difficult, violent family. I was not in good shape when I was 18 years old. I had really lost my way. I was into drugs and alcohol. I was a mess, and I got pregnant. And had I not been able to have an abortion at that point in my life and the life of that child would have been fundamentally destroyed. I did not want a child. I could not support a child. I wasn't able to have a child. So I know for me personally, that decision allowed me my life. And I wouldn't be the person I am today had I had the burden of that child, and I had no ability whatsoever to raise a child. So if I think where we are today and I look what's happening, absolutely enrages me. It breaks my heart, but I don't believe this is the end. And I think we're at a moment, it's a pause, and we are going to get these rights back.
Dr. Gibson, the law is different now state by state because of this ruling last year. You're in Arizona. What's the situation there? What's changed in the last 7 months?
The last 7 months have been a significant roller coaster. We have had to pause abortion services. I was present in our clinic and our health center on the day of the Dobbs decision, where I had to greet patients in the waiting room and let them know that I would not be able to legally provide them the services that I had promised I would and that they needed and deserved. We've then had to pause, resume, pause, and finally we are now again able to resume abortion services, but there are still real significant restrictions on abortion care here in Arizona. The one thing that we have really recognized is that the true reality is that abortion has always been a medical necessity throughout all of history, and that will not change. That truth will not change with abortion bans and regulations and restrictions. We've just seen that patients are really bearing the significant burden of these decisions that politicians and lawmakers have made. Every day I sit and listen to reasons that patients cannot be pregnant, and I've had heartbreaking encounters. For example, this week I took care of a patient who didn't want to leave our abortion clinic after she'd had her procedure. She was staying in a domestic violence shelter. One of the conditions of her stay was that she had to be pregnant. And she was so fearful that when she got back to the shelter, it would be discovered that she was no longer pregnant and that she would be expelled. And she had nowhere safe to go. We just absolutely have to demand better.
I'm going to ask one more question here because we're tight on time. We have less than a minute. V, I want to ask you, we had an NBC nationwide exit poll during the midterms. It showed that a majority of voters said abortion should be legal in all or most cases. Where does this go next?
Well, I just think I want to just also honor the amazing work that Jill and all the frontline activists are doing. We have seen the incredible work that's happening in the states to demand, individual states that are still fighting for their rights. We cannot accept this. This is not an end point. We're going to see this weekend thousands of people in the streets who believe that abortion is a right. My bodily autonomy will be mine, and over my dead body will this continue to go on. And I want to say that I believe that when we see the end of democracy, because the countries that have pushed back, the 4 countries in the world, like the U.S., that are denying abortion and have pushed back on those rights, are countries where democracy is dying. Women have a right to a bodily autonomy. That is just the nature of being a human being. And I really believe we are going to see an amazing fight ahead, and this is certainly not over.
All right. V. Ensler and Dr. Jill Gibson, thank you both for joining us tonight. We really do appreciate your time. Coming up, he once hunted al-Qaeda militants, but recently he helped save a dog that was being held for ransom. That veteran's incredible story before we go. Dog lovers, this next story may have you shedding a tear or two. Imagine your pup was taken right from your own home and then held for ransom. That's what happened to one woman in Maryland when her little Yorkie went missing. NBC's Katie Beck shows us what happened next.
It's a terrifying image for any dog owner. A stranger lurking outside to steal your pet.
It hurt my heart, to hear her crying. It was rough. Sure. And she couldn't sleep.
This Ring camera footage captured 12-year-old Samaje Witherspoon's Yorkie, Avery, being dog-napped outside her Landover, Maryland home. A teenager is seen enticing the dog with treats. Then she and a male accomplice make off with the dog in plain sight. Right away, a missing flyer went up. Then came a text message from the dog nappers with a ransom demand and a photo of poor Avery in a cage. Raquel Witherspoon first called police, then the news.
Avery, he's out there. We don't know.
Her story caught the attention of highly trained tracking expert, former Marine veteran Rick McAmmer, who once tracked members of al-Qaeda. He's also a dog owner.
I couldn't imagine if someone kidnapped my dog.
So he put his paid job on the back burner and made finding Avery his mission, tracing the ransom number to a social media page where he saw a similar image of the woman on the Ring video.
He was getting close, really close.
He was on it.
He's really good.
He found the dog, shared his intel with police. With a search warrant, Avery was recovered and a suspect charged.
How does this rank in terms of victories that you've had in your...
Oh, this is probably the best one.
Avery's still a little skittish, home safe and sound. A homecoming and a first meeting in person for the rescue team.
Thank you so much.
What does that mean to you?
I'm just very thankful. Not a lot of people would jump right on it.
A wrong turned right, a mission that matters.
Those of us who have dogs understand just how important they are.
Even when the hostage has 4 legs. Katie Beck, NBC News, Landover, Maryland.
Katie, thank you so much for that. And because it's Friday and you need more cute animals, here are your 60 seconds of joy. Dolphins, of all creatures, have been spotted in New York City's Bronx River. NYC Parks tweeted this video saying, "This is great news. It shows that the decades-long effort to restore the river as a healthy habitat is working." And Hawaii's big wave surf contest, known as the Eddy, is finally making a comeback this weekend. It was last held back in 2016. You see, incredibly specific weather conditions are needed to surf 30-plus foot waves. Check this out. Pet rabbits in Hong Kong are being pampered at this adorable Bunny Hotel while their owners are away. The Bunny-style resort is already extremely popular. It was fully booked for Christmas and, as you can imagine, is already taking reservations for Easter. And speaking of rabbits, this Lunar New Year marks the start of the Year of the Rabbit. It's celebrated in Asian communities all around the world, kicking off on Sunday and continuing for 2 weeks. And for the first time, it's an official holiday in the state of California. That does it for us. I'm Joe Fryer for Now Tonight. Have a great weekend. We'll see you right back here next week. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.